everyone, I'm Heather. I'm back for what I hope will be a quick video because it is Saturday and I have things to do. But I thought I would do one of these videos that I've been watching loads of recently and really enjoying, of people's favorite books from last year. So as I'm like going through all the books that I want to read for the new year and all the books that I read for last year and sort of like looking back on it and thinking about the successes in bookness over the years, or the ones that I found that I really enjoyed and the ones I didn't like so much, I started to think, oh, it's more like a catalogue of how my year has gone. Like, that is how I personally catalogue experiences in my mind. Like, if people are like, what'd you have for dinner or whatever, I'm like, what did I have for dinner? Oh, I was reading so-and-so, and when I was reading so-and-so, I was eating such and such. Like, all of my memories and all of my experiences are sort of like framed by what I was reading at the time. And as I was thinking about all my favourite books, I was remembering sort of the things that I was doing at the time and how the year has gone, and realised that 2019 was an amazing year for me. I absolutely loved the crap out of 2019, and I thought I would do sort of a love letter to 2019 in book lists. So I was watching a couple of these favourite of 2019 book videos, and one of them was Sean and Bert on Past Story Time talking about their favourite ones, and Sean mentioned something about like she wasn't sure if she liked the book so much for the book or if it was more the experience she had while reading the book. And I sort of had that same problem, sort of trying to figure out what my favourite books were for the year. I was like, I have a really positive memory of this book, but thinking back on the actual book, is it the actual story in the book that I enjoyed, or was it the experience I had of reading it? Like, what was happening in my life, where I was, what I was doing while I was reading that book? It sort of gets all mixed together. And so I think I've separated my favourite reads for this year into 4 specific book lists. So my favourite non-fiction books, my favourite general fiction books, my favourite novellas, and my favourite miscellaneous, and each one has 4 books in it. 2019 for me, like one of the main reasons it was such an amazing year, is that I started out the year really low. It was sort of, I think, coming to the end of 2018 was like a low point for me. 2018 was not ideal for me in, you know, the catalogue of years. In 2018, I got switched sort of involuntarily in my job in the university. They did restructuring and they moved us from the team that we were on and in the location and in the job that we were in involuntarily to like a completely different team, and like merged us with another team and changed the job completely. And it was the worst. I was so unhappy in that job. I like basically went into like a sort of depression. Like, I didn't do any of my hobbies anymore. I started eating loads and just sitting around and moping. I got really fat. I stopped like interacting with people. I didn't go out with my friends as much. Like, I turned into a completely different person. I turned into like a bummer version of myself. And so I started out 2019 like that, and then over the course of the year sort of pulled myself out, sort of like in the sort of American tradition of like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, just sort of, I don't know, clutched my life back bit by bit until the end of 2019, when I realized for the first time ever I couldn't really think of any New Year's resolutions immediately to hand. Like, usually I come to the end of the year and I'm like, right, well, this part of my life is more than unsatisfactory and I'm going to deal with it. But sort of coming up to the end of 2019, I was so happy with my life that I was like, I guess I have to resolve to go to that 50th new country. Gotta really get on that. Like, I couldn't, like, I've come up with some things now that I can definitely work on, but I couldn't immediately think of any way that I definitely wanted my life to be different, and that was awesome. And obviously the books that I read in that year were better books for the fact that they happened in that year, in that sort of year of progress and making my life better and different and taking on new hobbies. I started BookTube this year and it was amazing for my life, and I discovered so many new things and went to so many new places, and the books that I read at that time sort of have come with me on the journey, and now I'll always remember those things in my life in that year based on the books I read at that time. So, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble. First list. favorite non-fiction books of 2019. And the first one is Godsey Texas by Lawrence Wright. Okay, so this one came about in the part of my life. It was early in the year and I still wasn't particularly happy with how things were going. I hated my job. But my friends and I decided that we were gonna go home. So I took 2 British friends with me home to Seattle and met up with another of my friends, Kathy, one of my oldest friends from school. And we did a road trip from Seattle to New Orleans for Mardi Gras in February. So not ideal because you have to go over like the Rocky Mountains and stuff like that in February. It was pretty snowy. It got a bit like harrowing. However, it was really fun. I really enjoyed like going through a bunch of different states. Like I hadn't really seen a lot before. Like I think I've only been to Texas one time in my whole life, and it's always sort of stuck in my mind as a sort of weird place that's characteristic, that's sort of stereotypically American, but also nothing like the America I've ever experienced in my American life. You know, I've always lived in places that were very different from Texas. So it's always been in my mind as like a sort of like weird place full of character or whatever. So knowing that I was going to go through Texas on this road trip, I read this book about Texas. It's this guy named Lawrence Wright. He is a pretty famous like journalist and writer or whatever, and he's from Texas. And he's lived in a million places in America and sort of outside of America, and then he's come back to Texas. So he's pretty much, you know, like a Democrat. He's a liberal guy, you know, he's in sort of the arts or whatever. So he's not really stereotypical of a Texan, but he is still really Texan. He really loves Texas and he feels very strong connection to being from Texas. And he was just sort of saying in this book a million sort of like crazy facts about Texas and sort of the history of Texas and sort of a bit of an explanation or sort of like a description of why Texans are the way they are, sort of compared to what people generally feel that they are. And there were just loads of interesting things in there about like the history of Texas, and like their state government is apparently way more like a parliament than like a presidential democracy. So loads of the states, you've got a really strong sort of central governor figure in the same way that we have a strong presidential figure in sort of the national government. But apparently in Texas, it's way more like a parliament where the governor himself isn't sort of the strongest figure. It's more to do with like the state Congress. But also they only meet sort of like every 18 months or so. So like they get all this governing done just like crazy fast within very small amounts of time. But he was saying really interesting things about how oil, like boom and bust, has shaped Texas and the people in Texas. You know, so you get a lot of like bursts of wealth, and then everyone just sort of like spends all that money and then ends up really poor and then bursts into wealth again. You get loads of people who are like billionaires, then they have nothing, and then they're billionaires again, and then they have nothing. And how loads of places like this, they haven't sort of invested in like culture or the arts or schools or anything. They're just sort of like cultural shells where no one is thought to sort of invest for the future. They're just there to spend all their money as quickly as they can before it goes away and then make more money. And I really loved that. I thought it was super interesting. And I remember it being a really fun trip as well. Okay, so the next one is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This one I read for an office book club. So that's something that we did this year. My friend Rahaf and I, we sort of came together and we're like, we should have a book club. Sort of, she came to me and she was like, you know, we should do book club. And I was like, girl, fire. We did it. We just made it. Like, our lives were unsatisfactory at work, you know, we didn't really have any social stuff, whatever. And then we just like, guys, should we have a book club? And loads of people joined. It was like loads of people in the office, and we're still part of it. They still work there, even though I've gone to a different job. And I still meet them. I'm going to meet them actually this week to talk about another book. But I felt like that was, you know, really fun and really like something to do with progress. Like you're unhappy and you want something to happen and then you just do it. And it was really fun. Anyway, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, we did one of the first ones for our book club, and everyone really liked it, I think. It's about this killer, this like Golden State Killer, and this woman who sort of relentlessly like chased him and tried to sort of figure out who he was. So there's all these like murders and rapes and robberies and everything, and she just sort of like relentlessly like follows all of these accounts, just obsessively going through you know, testimonies and police reports, and she was on all these forums to talk about this killer and everything. And it turns out that she'd actually realized, like she'd actually found out loads of different things about him, and ended up leading to him actually being caught. So after this book ended, they caught him. So the book ends with them still not having caught him, but then like a couple months later, after it came out or whatever, they actually did find the guy. Like, I'm gonna put his mugshot somewhere around here because he is terrifying. He's like the most frightening grandpa. Like Santa Claus of your nightmares is basically what this guy is like. But as it goes through, like all of these different things come together. So you've got, first of all, a robber, and a rapist, and a murderer. And then later on you find out that all three of these guys are the same guy, just over the course of 20 years. And he had like crazy things. He'd mess with the minds of a whole neighborhood. He'd just like find a neighborhood in California, case it, right? And then just start picking houses off, you know, and he'd like hit a bunch of houses all in that neighborhood, sort of all like in the same bit of time. He'd sort of sneak in the windows, tie up the partner of the woman or whatever, rape the woman for ages while the partner had to watch, you know, and mess with their minds. Like there's this one woman who said she was tied up and blindfolded for ages, and she thought the guy had left, but she wasn't sure. She didn't move. She wasn't allowed to move. You know, he said, don't move. And then she sort of waited, you know, like in like anxious silence, trying to see if he'd left for just like an hour. And then she moved a bit, and then she heard his voice or whatever, like he hadn't left. Just for an hour he was sitting in silence, waiting for her to maybe think that he had left so that he could mess with her mind. He's so creepy. Like this one woman said, she called a friend, she was like, I think there was like something up with my house, like my door was open or whatever, like I don't know what's up with it. And the friend was like on the police force or something like that, and he was sort of alert to potentially this guy being around, and he was like, holy shit, go check your window. Like, is your window open, and are there footsteps just, or like foot imprints just below your windowsill on the outside? And she went, she looked, and she's like, yeah. And he's like, shit, she's next. Like, she was gonna be next. Like chilling, so chilling. You should definitely read that book. It was so good. Anyway, the woman who chased this guy and wrote this book, she died. She died of like an accidental drug overdose because she was an insomniac. She was taking like sleeping pills or whatever. She accidentally killed herself. And this sort of book had to then be just finished up by her like friends and her sort of, you know, fellow people working on this case, and her husband, who's like a famous actor, this like Patton Oswalt guy. But anyway, I thought it was so good. Okay, so the next one, number 3, is The Library Book by Susan Orlean. I absolutely love this one. So it took me ages to read it because it's quite thick, and I had the paperback, or I had the hardback edition, so it's like heavy and hard to carry around. But I absolutely loved it, and I'm so glad I read it. It's basically, so the premise of it is that it tells the story of this massive library fire that they had in 1986 at the Los Angeles Public Library. But sort of in the background, it's also just sort of a love letter to libraries in general. And it's sort of the history of Los Angeles Public Library in its sort of unique way that it came about, you know, LA starting out as sort of a nothing town in the middle of nowhere on the edge of the world, and sort of slowly sort of building up as this sort of frontier bit into an actual like large metropolitan city and everything. Various people who were the city librarians for Los Angeles and their weird like character quirks, and but also sort of a description of the fire, like how she talks about the fire, how it was the hottest fire loads of the firefighters had ever seen. It was so hot. It was like one of these phenomenon that people only see, you know, so rarely, where the fire actually burned clear. So it was just like a sort of wobbly wall. Like it was so hot, you couldn't even see the fire. And it just like devoured all of the books in the public library. And she talks about the guy who they thought maybe did it. They're not really sure even now who started it or why or whatever, but they thought for ages that it was this one guy, and they sort of talk about him and his like weird want to be an actor, like weird sort of obsessive liar type personality, which was super interesting, and I absolutely loved that book, and you should definitely read that one. The very last one on the list is Educated by Tara Westover, and this one I read nearing the very end of the year, sort of December time, and that was when I think, you know, the last part of the year when just everything was like really good. I realized, I think then, that 2019 was an amazing year, and I was sort of on top of it, and it was sort of Christmas time, and I was going out drinking all the time for Christmas parties and festivities and everything, and I was just sort of cozy inside in the warm, just sort of reading this book. But anyway, it's crazy. It messed all the way with my mind, so much that when I went home for Christmas to see my parents, my mom got it as well. I was telling her about it, and she's like, I'm going to go now and buy this book because it sounds crazy. But anyway, it's about this girl, real life story. She was born and raised in Idaho in like a really strict Mormon family, like one of these like families that's so strictly religious and strictly Mormon, and sort of like a bit uniquely American in that they don't interact with sort of people outside of their sort of group of religious people, you know. They're sort of a fringe extreme sort of wing, and they sort of fear the government, and they're sort of wary of government, so they don't like register any of their children's births with the government. They don't have any interaction with the government at all. They don't have any interaction with like the establishment either. They don't take their kids to hospitals. They don't take them to doctors that are sort of in the establishment. They're all born to sort of unlicensed midwives, which is what this girl's mother ends up being. She's an unlicensed midwife, and she delivers the children of this sort of extreme religious wing. And they don't register with them with the government. They don't have birth certificates. They don't have passports. The government doesn't know they exist. And whenever they get sick or something bad happens to them, they sort of have like herbs and essential oils and various things that they make themselves that they use to sort of treat these things, and quite often they're not treated properly. And the girl said like she'd never been cured of a headache before. Like she always used to get a headache for whatever reason, and then her mother would like put essential oils on it or whatever, and it wouldn't heal, it wouldn't do anything, it would just go away on its own. So when she was in university or whatever later, and somebody gave her like a Tylenol and she tried it and it took her headache away, she was like, what is this magic? But anyway, she eventually leaves this group of people and she goes to university. She wants to sort of go to college and do something else. So she starts out at Brigham Young University, but she was in like a special program to do with people who were homeschooled, and she lied to get in. She said she had proper homeschooling with proper tests and stuff when she really hadn't. She had basically no education at all. She could read and like count and add, and that was basically it. So everything at Brigham Young University, like entering the wider world, going to university for the first time, it just like shocked the crap out of her. There was like one instance where the professor was talking about something, she didn't know what it was, and she was like, excuse me, what's so-and-so word? And he was like, just stone-faced, shut his book. He was like, well, that's funny, you know. And then the girl next to her, who was friendly to her before that, but not after, said, you really shouldn't joke about that. And she was like, oh shit. So she went home and she Googled it or whatever, and she's like, oh, Holocaust is bad. It's a bad thing. She'd like never heard of it before. But loads of sort of crazy things like that, you know. When she was offered something where she won this ability to go to Cambridge in England to study sort of something else, she needed a passport. And she went to her mother and she's like, I need a passport, so I need a birth certificate. And that was a problem because establishing her identity with the government was almost impossible. They didn't know when she was born, where she was born. Nobody could sort of say even what her birthday was. Her whole life she'd just been like, it's in late September, and she would pick the day, and she'd never pick a Sunday because she didn't want to go to church on her birthday. She'd be like, in the last rough 2 weeks of September this year, my birthday is going to be on this day because it's going to be my favorite day. So I didn't even know when she was born. They had to sort of pick a day and make a birth certificate and then get a passport, and it took ages, and she had to fight with loads of people. It was almost impossible to establish her identity. But anyway, This book was amazing. It blew my whole mind off. She ended up getting a PhD in historiography, like the study of history, like the history of history, because she was so amazed by how fluid it is. Like, history is not an objective thing you can touch. It's something that's subjective. Like, every different person has a different history to tell about a single event. So you've got this one thing that happened. You're going to have 86 gazillion different histories, all different, even though they describe the single event. And she was just like amazed how she could have a completely different view of the history of the world than other people outside of where she was from. And so she studied that and has a PhD from like Harvard and Cambridge. Anyway, you should definitely I think read it. It was nuts. Okay, so this video is like going on for ages. Like, I need to pick up the pace. I apologize for this. But the next list I'm going to do is my 4 favorite novellas. So the first one I'm going to do is West by Karis Davis. This is actually one of the first books that I reviewed specifically sort of for BookTube. It was right after I started my BookTube channel, which has changed my life, introduced me to loads of people and loads of new things, and has given me like a really solid creative outlet that I'd been missing at the beginning of the year. So I remember I was actually on a camping trip at home in Idaho when this happened, like in a camper van with my family sort of like all around me, and I had to go all the way into the woods to do a review because I needed like a quiet place to like talk about the book. But I didn't want like any of my 80,000 aunts and cousins like walking into my video, so I had to like go into the woods. But I also remember reading it, like I was really jet lagged and everyone was sort of sleeping in the campground and like the woods were really quiet. And this is when a chipmunk jumped into my van. Like, it was sort of like coming up to me and it was like, what's up, what's up? And I was like, oh, cute. And then it was just like ninja jumped into my van and disappeared. I was like, no, get out of my van. Anyway, it was super early in the morning. My kid was sleeping in the back and it was just like quiet, early morning, beautiful, reading this book. And it's a book sort of about the wilderness and the woods and exploration and just being surrounded by the quiet woods and family and early morning. It was just amazing, and I'll always remember that camper van associated with this book, West. But anyway, it's so good. So the author is Welsh, and it won like a Welsh award, like a sort of Wales Book Award or whatever, but it's not about Wales, it's about America, obviously. So in the 19th century, before the vast majority of what is America now was actually explored by white people, you know, sort of they only knew up to roughly the Mississippi River, and then everything beyond that, there's just like a scary unknown wilderness where no one really knows what's going on. And it's around the time when they start finding dinosaur bones in the ground, but they didn't really know anything about dinosaurs, and they hadn't really found dinosaur bones really before, and there wasn't really a study of dinosaurs, and they're sort of a bit confused about it, you know. They're like, do these creatures still exist? Is this one bone from one creature? Are there more bones from this creature? Are there a bunch of different kinds of these creatures? Like, are they long dead? Are they still out there in this vast wilderness we know nothing about? So this dad, he sort of reads a newspaper article about these things and he's like, they're out there. I gotta go and see them. They're massive animals like walking along this like, you know, terrain in the wilderness, and they're just out there and nobody's ever seen them. I have to go and explore and I have to see them. And he leaves his kid with his like cranky spinster sister, and he just goes in search of these dinosaurs. Obviously we know he's not gonna find, but he doesn't know that. And the poor girl, the daughter left behind, she's just left sort of loving and respecting and just defending to shit her father to everyone who's like, he's crazy, why has he done that, you know? And I'll just leave it at that. I don't want you to know what else happens, but it was beautiful. Like, the words that were used, the language, the characters were amazing. I just loved that book. Okay, so the next one, the next novella is Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. And this is one of the first books I read specifically because BookTube told me to. And now that I have this whole list of books that I can read because BookTube has told me to, my life is 1,000 times better for it. I would have never read anything like this previously. But it's basically about this guy, this dad and his 2 kids, and his wife, their mother, has just died. And he's got to sort of go about his life now, raising his boys, getting on with his work, just living his life now after she's died. And they've obviously got to go through this period of grieving, you know what I mean? But in all of that, there's this massive crow. Like, I don't know, I don't really understand what it is. Like, I guess it's just like, I don't know, like, you know, it's supposed to represent grief or something, I don't know. But it's just a massive crow man. It can talk. It's just there. It like sasses back to people whenever they say anything. Like there's a bugbear. The dad will sort of say something and the crow will just like sass back, you know, like he's always got something like witty and stupid to say, and it makes the whole family just feel shitty about themselves, but also better for him being there. And he basically just sort of guides them through their grief until the very end when he just leaves. He's like, you guys, you know, are good now. You'll get on now. You know, you're out of the bad zone and you don't need me anymore, so I'm just gonna leave. But it had me absolutely sobbing. Just me in Cafe Nero, like with the rain pattering outside, just like losing my absolute mind because of how sad and beautiful and amazing it was. You should definitely read that one. The next one is called The End We Start From by Megan Hunter. And this is one that I listened to on audiobook through my brand new discovery of BorrowBox, which is an audiobook app run through my local library. So I can just check out audiobooks from my house on the app through my library for free, and it has changed my life in amazing ways. This one, The End We Start From, is a novella, and I found it when I was looking for novellas. So in November I did like novellas in November for BookTube, and at that time I was looking specifically for novellas, like short audiobooks that like would have been novellas if I'd seen them in physical form. And this one was amazing. It's about like a sort of cataclysmic like flood in London, so it's like a cli-fi, like a sort of climate dystopia sort of thing. And London is just sort of wiped out from this massive flood. It goes, you know, stories and stories high, this massive flood, and people have to sort of flee from London and get out. And there's obviously, you know, rioting, lack of food, lack of resources. People are murdering each other to save their families and to feed their families and things like that. And in the midst of all of this, a woman has a baby, and she flees with her brand new baby and her husband to her husband's parents' house, sort of in the country, and they live a bit there for a while. But then the husband and the parents have to sort of go away to find food and resources and things, and whenever they come back from those trips, they're not okay. Sometimes they're down a man, somebody has died and they don't want to talk about it on the trip, or sometimes they're just PTSD as hell afterwards. And sort of one time it's just the husband and the girl. The parents are dead now, no real explanation, but they've got to flee as well. There's no real explanation of why they have to flee, but he gets them up in the middle of the night and they're like, we gotta go. But sort of, they go to different places, different sort of refugee type things, meet a couple people, but it's just terrifying, them on the move. And eventually they lose the guy as well, and it's just the woman and the baby. And through all of this, the baby's just like progressing in like the most normal baby way, and like the bond between the mother and the baby is like completely the same. So you have all of this horrendous stuff going on, you know, dystopian, just the world falling apart, but within that you just have like a mother and baby bond and like a growing baby, just like in a completely normal, like beautiful sort of way. I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was gorgeous. I loved the characters. I loved that it had like a lot of action, but also a lot of description of just sort of normal things in the midst of chaos. So anyway, definitely read that one. My last novella that was amazing was The Guest Cat by Takashi Hirade. Still don't know how to say that. I need to speak to some people that I know who lived in Japan and ask them how you say that. But this is the first one that's really got me into weird Japanese novellas, like weird like Japanese books or like books in translation from Japan that I really like now and I didn't know. But this one is about this couple in the 80s living sort of just outside Tokyo or whatever in one of these old houses. Like they don't really have these sort of manor houses anymore just outside Tokyo, apparently, but it was sort of one of the last ones, and they lived in one of the outbuildings while this elderly couple lived in like the proper manor house, and it had a proper Japanese garden in between it. And they were writers, the couple, the husband and wife. They didn't have any kids or anything, and they didn't want any kids, and they didn't want any responsibility, really. They just wanted to be writers. But the kid next door got a cat, and the cat, obviously not understanding that it belongs to one house and not another one, just sort of went wandering. And they sort of half adopted the cat as well. The cat would spend about half the time at their house and half the time home. And they would just they were amazed by the cat and then just like in love with the cat, and they used to just follow the cat around and watch it doing things for ages. They'd give it little toys in a little box, and like it was just gorgeous how they talked about the cat. And like, I'm not gonna tell you what happens to the cat, but like I still think you should definitely read this. It was gorgeous. I loved it. And it just sort of launched me into sort of Japanese and translation books. Anyway. Okay, so the next list is my 4 favorite sort of general fiction books from 2019. The first one is Memoirs of a Geisha, which is one of the very first books I read the year at all. I think it was the second book of the year that I read in 2019. And I just remember feeling really depressed in January in my house about my situation and reading this actually quite depressing book. So it was like a merging of our depression. Like I was feeling sad and reading about this sad girl, and it was like, I don't know, misery loves company in a sort of weird way, even though all of the people in the book were fictional. But basically this girl in Japan before the war, like just before World War II, she is a peasant, and her dad has to sort of give her away. He has to sort of sell her and her sister for various reasons. Like, he's really poor, he's like dying, I think the mother died. And she's sold to be a servant, but she ends up being like an apprentice in a geisha thing to become a geisha, but she messes that up and has to become a servant again. But as part of like a bet or something, this famous geisha sort of takes her on to make her a geisha anyway. And it's just sort of all of the crazy stuff happening in like the tradition of being a geisha right before the war, and then the war happening, and then sort of how quickly the country and all of their sort of folk traditions changed following sort of influx of like American money and American people, and like just sort of all of like the modernity and the changes and everything following the war. But it was like beautiful, like how the author describes things. The characters are amazing. There's really shocking things and like things that really made me want to go to Japan. Like, my husband earlier was like having a chat. He's like, you know, we could go to Tokyo. I was looking. What do you think? I was like, yes. Anyway, so this one was gorgeous. It was like a love story. It was tragic. It was heartbreaking. Like, it made me cry a million times, but also I absolutely loved the ending. And it was just beautiful, and I loved it, and you should read it. Okay, so the next one is The Edge of Light by Whitney Sharer. And I read this one in Malta, right when like everything was starting to turn around. Like, I just gotten a brand new job in the law school, which is an amazing job now. I'm still in it and I love it so much. And I was really worried about moving house in order to be in a catchment for the school that my kid was going to. So she was in the school for a year, and it was sort of up for another go. Like, we'd have to apply for that school again, even though we were outside the catchment. I had all this anxiety, like, what if she has to go to a different school and she doesn't know anybody and she has to leave all her friends, and it's really far away and we have to like drive there in traffic every day and we can't just walk like we normally do. And I was just like a ball of anxiety about it. And while we were in Malta, we got the email that said we got a place at that school. She's there now, she loves it, it's an amazing school. So this is sort of what I think when I think of this book, The Age of Light, me in Malta, getting all this amazing news and feeling really good in the sunshine and eating great food, reading this book in our hotel room. So it's basically about this American in like the 1920s. She's a model and also sort of an amateur photographer, and she moves from America to Paris for a bit to sort of like, you know, find inspiration and be a photographer and learn about art and stuff. And she meets this famous American photographer, and she becomes like his apprentice, and also his lover, as you do. It's Paris, it's the 20s, everyone's just having so much sex. But all of like the scenes, all the love scenes, all the descriptions of things are really beautiful. The characters are really well laid out. Like they're obviously based on real people, but I think it's done really well. Like I remember sort of them talking about art and them talking about artists and things. I remember it feeling really not pretentious, you know, so lots of times when you read things about art and when an author has to describe art, they always sort of talk about it in a really forced, pretentious sort of way, like they're trying to talk about wine or something, like, oh, hints of dismay, you know, or like whatever. But the way that the author spoke about art felt really genuine and really beautiful. And the whole story is told sort of by this American girl later on, so she's looking back on her time in Paris in the 20s, and she's actually like older and like struggling a bit with PTSD and stuff because she was a war photographer in the 40s. She sort of went onto the continent in Europe and sort of like took photos of all these really horrendous things sort of for posterity during the war, and it really messed with her head. And anyway, it was gorgeous. I loved this book. I love the descriptions of all the people, and afterwards I just did like a really intense Wikipedia rabbit hole situation to do with these people because they're real people and I'd never really heard of them before. And I sort of like looked at all of their art, and all of the famous art that they mention in there that they've done really is gorgeous. And like she came up with this new technique for photography, sort of like to do with like an X-ray type thing, you know, where like the light places and dark places are all messed up, you know, and the guy actually stole it from her. Like he entered this competition with it saying that it was his, and he sort of went down in history as having done it, but she actually did the majority of sort of the doing of the sort of the making of the new technique. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll like maybe put up like pictures of like what I'm on about. But it's really good and I love that book and you should read it. Okay, so the next one is The Rose Garden by Susanna Kearsley, and this one was amazing. I really liked it. I remember sort of sitting in my horrible job and reading it and thinking that was a bit like really escapist, you know, like here is my horrible job and here is an amazing book, and sort of like trying to live inside the book and escape inside the book. But it's about basically this woman in Cornwall who's like messed up in time, like something about her and about this house in Cornwall that she's going to visit is all like time warbled. So she'll just like be walking like normally, you know, in modern time, and then switch into like the 18th century with this like pirate family or whatever that used to live there before. And obviously, as you do, she falls in love with the pirate guy because he's dashing, you know, debonair, bit dangerous. Like, it's not like, you know, a smutty romance or whatever. There's like a bit of like, you know, business, but not like a loads amount. Like, it's more to do with plot than sex. But it was really good, and like the ending is like a wacky ending, you know, like out of the blue twister ending that I did not see coming and was amazing. And I just really love things like that where like there's like time distortion and stuff like Outlander and like the Time Traveler's Wife and stuff where time gets all messed up, and it's really interesting. So I really liked that one. And the last one for just general fiction I'll say is The Descendants by Kauai Hart Hemmings. Still don't know how to say that. I should ask some people. Anyway, I read this one in Hawaii for Christmas. I have actually mentioned this one a lot recently, and I'm sorry if this is like the 8,000th video you've watched to do with The Descendants, but it was so good. Like while I was in Hawaii, I always try to read books that are to do with the place that I'm in, just to sort of like get in the headspace. But like the first book that I read in Hawaii was a factual account of like how it is that white people came to sort of overtake the island, you know, basically throw out the sort of native royalty and decide that they were in charge now. But then the next book that I read, The Descendants, was like a fictional account based on sort of this taking over. So the main characters are descendants of the sort of first American business people and sort of missionaries and stuff that came onto Hawaii and sort of mixed with the Hawaiian population. So the descendants of a Hawaiian native royal princess and an American businessman, and they own loads of land in Hawaii because of this. Like, they've inherited a load of land, but they've run it a bit into the ground and haven't taken care of it. So the family, like all the cousins and this guy, have decided that they need to sell it to like a developer for loads of money. But in the midst of this big decision that they have to make to sell it to this developer, the guy, his wife is in a coma. She was in like a boating accident, and now suddenly he's got to like learn how to be a dad. Like before he was just a lawyer with 2 kids, and now because the mother's like in a coma, he's got to figure out how to actually be a dad and like be with his kids and learn how to do things with his kids. But like life is going by too fast, and it's like coming at him, and he doesn't know how to deal with it, and it's absolutely hilarious. Like every little sort of thing that happens to him in his life, he just thinks, oh god, like life just keeps happening and life keeps coming and I have no idea what's going on. But anyway, there's a lot of like twists and turns in that one. Like they sort of find some things out about the mother like while she's in a coma. And it's really like pretty and like beautiful as well, because the family sort of progresses and gets closer together, you know, like the dad and the kids sort of learning to cope and like grieve and like be with each other and be family together, and it was really cute. But also within this wider world of Hawaii and like the history of Hawaii, which was really interesting. Okay, so the last category I have is like a miscellaneous category of just sort of all of the different kinds of books that were my favorites in the year. So the first one I have is my favorite kids book from the year that I read during Believe-a-thon in November, where we just read like a load of middle grade sort of kids books, and it was amazing. It sort of opened my eyes to the amazingness of kids books, and I'm gonna read absolutely loads now. I think like I sort of thought, oh, my kid's only 5, so she's a bit small for these books, and obviously I'm an adult, so I need to read adult books. So the middle grade sort of novel idea just sort of went past me, like I didn't even register that they were amazing, but they are. So my favorite one for the kids book section was Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So I read another one of hers when I was a kid, The Secret Garden, that I loved, and I used to get in trouble when I was in school for reading ahead of it. So like I'm supposed to sort of say about, you know, chapter 4, but I'd get all confused and sort of say things from chapter 10 or whatever. My teacher would be like, Heather, I told you you're not allowed to read ahead. But anyway, I'd never read anything else of hers, and she's written quite a lot. So when the opportunity came up to read Little Princess, I was like, awesome, let's do it, even though I saw the movie in the 90s and loved it and thought it would ruin it. But actually the movie is way different from the book, so it was perfectly fine. But like the story is just really cute and gorgeous. This girl, she's rich and her dad is rich. He drops her off at a boarding school in London, and she has all these special privileges at the school. She's richer than anyone in the school, so she gets her own room and she gets fluffy stuff and she gets like different food, and like she's so sophisticated and rich and blah blah blah. But then her dad dies, like not in the war, I think actually that was the movie. In the book he actually just gets ill, like he invests money into his friend's like business or whatever, and the friend's business loses all the money, and then the dad sort of gets like a brain fever. He goes a bit crazy with like the anxiety of having lost all his money and not being able to look after his kid, and then he dies. And because he's lost all his money, because he's dead, the girl is now an impoverished orphan, and the school gets this news and they're like, what are you gonna do, you know, like she's there, she like owes you money, blah blah. So the really like mean school lady decides to make her a servant and like forces her to move into the attic with the other servant and like treats her really crappy. But through it all, she's like really brave, and she tells all these stories to herself and all of her friends in order to sort of make her feel better, and to sort of, she's always like, oh, I'm still a princess even though all of this has happened, blah blah blah. And then it sort of turns back and you realize it's actually like a really good ending. Like it, despite like the dad really is dead. I sort of thought, oh, the dad's gonna be back, but the dad is really dead. He really did die. But her fortunes do turn around, and it is really like uplifting at the end. You're like, oh, yay! Anyway, favorite kids book. Okay, so next up in miscellaneous is my favorite book of poetry, and that is Haysbert by Roberto Pastore. I love that name. So this one I feel like is the first one I've ever known like published by someone I know. Like I obviously don't actually know Bert. Like the internet is weird. It makes you feel like you know people you don't really know. I feel like I know Bert, you know. I watch a lot of his videos on Sean and Bert's channel, Past Story Time. Also follow him on Instagram, you know. I feel like he's a friend, even though I've never met him. Anyway, I feel really close to this book as well, because not only was it like a really good book of poetry with like really good sort of collection and themes in the book, but also I like basically know the guy who wrote it, so it's amazing. Like I actually do still have it, like it's here. Like it is here. I haven't been showing any of these books because so many of them were either from the library or ones that I bought for a second and then gave away, that I kind of didn't bother to sort of like see which ones I still have. But I do still have this one, obviously, because why not? I think like in here, my favorite one, I came back to it. So I read this one, I think, in the autumn on a road trip to my sister-in-law's wedding. My kid was like singing for ages in the back, and like my husband was like really annoyed at the traffic, and I was just like here, like escapist, like immersed in this book. But I came back to it around Christmas time because I remembered that one of my favorite ones from it was to do with Christmas. Like I can't find it now. Oh yeah, Christmas Time in Butte Park. That was my favorite one. So like when Christmas time sort of came around, I was like, oh yeah, and I sort of came back to it to read it. It's just really sort of like normal stuff, but more beautiful, you know, like if I was to just sort of live my life, but in like a gorgeous way. I don't know, all the stuff that he talks about is just normal stuff that I recognize. I'm like, oh, I've been to that place, I've done that exact thing. But when I did it, it was really boring, you know. When Bert did it, it was gorgeous. So anyway, that one, yeah, you should definitely read that one. Okay, so the next miscellaneous one is my favorite graphic novel that I read this year. And this is something that is completely new to me this year. Something else that's amazing has entered my life in the year 2019 and changed my world forever for the better is graphic novels. Like, I used to sort of see them as not really books, you know, like more like comic books than books, and I'm not into comic books, you know, because I'm an adult. But on a couple of channels, like loads of channels on BookTube, people are always talking about graphic novels, and one of them that everyone was talking about was Pumpkinheads by Faith Erin Hicks, I think is the person who wrote it. Person who illustrated it. No, I've got that wrong. Rainbow Roll wrote it, and Faith Erin Hicks illustrated it. Anyway, it was amazing. It was one of the first sort of graphic novels I've actually read, just thinking, oh, I'll give it a go. Everyone's reading it and they say it's amazing, and it's really autumny, you know, and everyone's like talking about like leaves falling and like crisp air and like warm drinks and blah blah blah, and I was like really getting into it. I was like, yeah, I'll get into autumn, you know. Picked it up and it was amazing, and it has changed my life, and now my kid and I are in love with graphic novels. So every time I'm reading a graphic novel, I also read it with her. So she and I used to read like a lot of kids books together, as you do, but I hate them because they're boring. Whereas she loves them. So graphic novels are an amazing hybrid of the things that we love. I like books with real ideas and real like plots and stuff, and she likes pictures with like not a lot of words at one time, you know, and things that she can really engage with visually, and we can do that together. And she really loved this book as well, and it sort of opened our whole like world to books that we love together. Anyway, this book, Pumpkinheads, if you're one of the only people on BookTube who've never read it, is these two friends, this guy and this girl in high school. It's like their last year in high school, and they work every year at like this autumn festival. It's like a place where you go to like have pumpkins and, you know, do like a corn maze and like a hay ride and everything in autumn, sort of around Halloween time. So it's on Halloween night, and it's like their last night working there, you know, together before they go off to college or whatever, and they just sort of ditch their post and go wandering around. Like they're supposed to be working like a particular stand, like the potato stand or whatever, and they just ditch that and they go wandering around, and like they do like the corn maze, and they talk a lot and they meet different people, and it's hilarious, and really like the illustrations are really good and really funny, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, so the very last one in this list is A Thief of Time by Tommy Hillerman. And this is like my favorite, like in the category of cozy serial mystery, I reckon, which isn't really a category that I get into that often. Like I'm not really into like the, you know, like predictable cozy serial mystery type thing like Agatha Christie's and stuff like that. But I'm absolutely in love with Tony Hillerman's mysteries. They take place on this massive reservation, this massive Indian reservation, like a Navajo reservation, in sort of roughly like Arizona. Like it sort of covers the Four Corners area where like Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico come together like as a sort of four corner thing. It's sort of around the area, so Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado-ish. And it's massive. And it's, because it's an official reservation, it's like a law unto itself. It's sort of considered separate from the laws of the rest of the United States. You know, they have their own sort of council, their own sort of government, they have their own police, they have their own justice system and everything like that. So the mysteries follow these like two detectives, or these two police officers with Navajo tribal police, and loads of things happen. Like it'll be like a death, or something was stolen, or like a really normal type crime that needs to be investigated by these police officers. But whenever they sort of go about investigating, when they go sort of looking for things and talking to people and trying to figure out what happened, they always encounter like really spiritual stuff. So it's really sort of, the background is like, you know, spiritual, old school Navajo ideas of like witches and like demons and like birds that can talk, and like, you know, old school sort of like Navajo tales and stuff, but only because really the people who they talk to and the area that they're in, like they believe it, you know? So it'll be like a really normal crime, like, okay, somebody killed somebody for money or whatever. But when they go to investigate who killed this person, it'll sort of start to look like, oh, actually it was like a demon spirit or whatever of this old Navajo whatever, because everyone they talk to and everything that they see happening actually leads you to believe that that really is it. But in the end, it is always just like so-and-so killed so-and-so for money. Like it's not actually all of this like spiritual stuff, but it's so alive in the people that as you're reading it, it starts to be alive in the story as well. But anyway, there's a gazillion of them. There's like 20 something odd of these mysteries, and they follow like the first guy, I think Leaphorn, Joe Leaphorn's like the original like detective guy, but then sort of in the middle he gets a bit old and they switch to Jim Chi. So the first ones are Joe Leaphorn and the last ones are Jim Chi, but my favorite ones are like this one, The Thief of Time. In the middle there's like 3 or 4 that sort of are the transition period between the two, where they're both in it. And those are my favorite ones, like Thief of Time. In this particular book, I think this woman who's like studying like old Navajo pots and like culture and stuff, she's an archaeologist, she goes into the sort of deserted parts of the reservation and sort of does digging and sort of looking for evidence of older civilizations and stuff, and she goes missing and they have to go and figure out what has happened to her. It's really interesting, really good history. You know, it's a good turn on your normal like police investigation story, because it's like Navajo tribal police instead of like sort of normal city police or whatever, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, that is the end of my favorite books from 2019. I apologize that it was so long. I should have tried to pick fewer books, like 10, instead of like doing separate lists in order for the video not to be so long. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you feel the same way as I do about books and how they sort of, it's less about the actual book and more about the experience that you have with the books. Like if you sort of also catalog all of your experiences and time in your mind according to the books you're reading at that time, let me know so I won't feel like such a weirdo. If you liked any of these books as well, or you want to read some of them, or if you want to tell me what your favorite books were for 2019, that would be amazing. I was super interested in that. Okay. That is it. I really hope that 2020 will also be just as good as 2019, and that all the books will be just as good, but it's hard to top 2019 TBH. Okay, love you all. Bye, bye, bye.